So yesterday, we made a video talking about the Montreal Canadiens and the Edmonton Oilers and whether or not they could both be interested in the same right-handed defenseman. Yeah, it's a pretty standard video for both of these teams because right-handed defense could be seen as a target. Not even necessarily right-handed defense, but right-handed young defense. And so while that video went over Columbus Young D, David Jiricek, this video is going to be a little bit more localized because today we're going out there and reading some comments made by David Pagnotta on the recent NHL SiriusXM radio show. This article will be linked in the description on NHLRumors.com. I know it's NHL Rumors, so not necessarily like from a mainstream hockey website, but I like this article a lot because what they did, the writer here, Jim Beringer, was they went out there and pretty much just transcribed word for word everything that David Pagnotta said on the recent edition of SiriusXM NHL Network Radio Power Play. This was all from the other day, and it's all there in the description if you want to read more about this yourself. So, let's go out there and read the comments made on this show. It was a segment with Steve Koulias and Craig Button, and David Pagnotta of the fourth period went out there and joined them. Button asked David Pagnotta about Montreal, and Steve had asked me a little bit earlier about the Canadiens as well, but I want to close in on David Savard. There's going to be a lot of teams as we get closer to the deadline into the new year. They're going to be looking for exactly that type of player, if not that player. Number one, the first part of my question. Is David Savard something that the Canadiens are willing to listen to right now? And are there teams that would be best served to jump out on that earlier rather than later? David Pagnotta replies, I think yes. The short answer on the first part is yes. I think Kent Hughes, it's definitely transcribed via AI. Kent Hughes and the Canadiens would certainly be willing to listen now on David Savard. I think they might want to push things off to try to maximize that return later on in the season. I don't know what team right now is going to make a play for him in terms of giving up a decent asset to pull it off now versus maybe in a couple of months. A lot of teams try to get ahead at least. The trend we've noticed in the last few years has been teams trying to get ahead of the curve by making moves towards January, end of January kind of zone. Even late like last season. I think the Bo Horvat deal happens right before the All-Star game, and that was kind of the first big domino to drop around the trade season. And I think you're going to see potentially David Savard having that opportunity for the Canadiens anyway, having the opportunity to move him a little bit earlier, maybe a month to 6 weeks ahead of the deadline at the beginning of March, and he's certainly going to be a prime target. Now pause, the Bo Horvat trade was like 2 years ago, not last year. It was in 2023, folks, and it happened at the very end of January. So if you wanted to map it out, okay, maybe 6 weeks-ish before the trade deadline, something like that. It was the first big domino to fall in the 22-23 season, and everything kind of went forward after that. David Savard, of course, Pagnotta's not saying that Savard is Bo Horvat, but he's just saying the circumstances of the trade and what it could do to the market could be similar in that respect. But if we go over to David Savard, let's dive into his profile this season and just kind of give the scoop as to what he's been for the Canadiens. For as bad as some Canadiens defensemen have been this season, I don't want to say David Savard has necessarily been that. I mean, you don't really expect much out of him offensively. He only has 4 points in 17 games after all, on pace for about 19, which would be a little bit lower than the past few seasons, admittedly, but come on. If you want offense from Canadiens defensemen, you're looking at Lane Hudson and Mike Matheson. David Savard isn't really in that conversation. Pretty much a lot of the things that you would expect to see that Cayden grows into, David Savard already has. I'd say shot blocking, I'd say defensive play. Sure, you would hope for a little bit more mobility on Cayden end, but David Savard is a guy who's a lot more of a veteran presence at 34 years old and who has had multiple Stanley Cup playoff runs in his career. Sure, he didn't win a cup every season, but he does have one chip that was acquired with the Tampa Bay Lightning back in 2021, against said Montreal Canadiens team. There's a lot of history here, especially with him being the main piece in a three-way trade all those years ago with Columbus and Tampa Bay. And ultimately, when you think about David Savard, he does bring value. I'd say that he is probably more reliable than a Troy Stecher or a Cody Ceci or a Ty Emberson or a Travis Dermott. So for the Edmonton Oilers, of course, this would be an interesting thought to go after. And if we read back onto the article here, let's go out and see what David Pagnotta says about Edmonton and Savard. Savard's got a $3.5 million cap hit. He's on an expiring deal. The Canadiens have one retention slot left in their roster where they can retain up to 50% of the contract. So 3.5 divided by 2, 1.75, he's going to be a very attractive piece. And I'm going to say as well, if you do a double salary retained, you send him over to some other team that's like bad, like Chicago or something, and you say, hey, Chicago, we're going to retain 50%, we're going to send him to you, you can retain 50% of that, and then you can send him to another team. You can get 75% salary retained on this guy. That's a very, very good deal. It's going to come down to the type of price a team wants to pay. When he was traded to Tampa during their run a couple of years ago, and I believe it was a three-way trade if I'm not mistaken, I think there was additional retention on his salary. It cost Tampa a first-round pick. I don't know if the Canadiens will get a first-round pick right now this season, but they might certainly push it if they're coughing up half that contract. He's definitely going to be a high commodity. And I can certainly see a team, and I think this has been suggested before out west, the Edmonton Oilers looking to add a player of his caliber to their back end later on in the season, to kind of strengthen themselves defensively, but also add a little bit of extra meat and muscle on the blue line. So, could David Savard be that upgrade for right D in Edmonton? Could he be a proper line mate for a guy like Darnell Nurse, for example? We saw Nurse have a stellar game yesterday against the Nashville Predators with 2 goals, including the overtime winner. And for me personally, who does own Darnell Nurse in fantasy, he was a keeper for me this previous offseason. I'm very happy to see that. I would love to see Darnell Nurse start to explode offensively and just become a lot more comfortable in playing his game. If David Savard is the player that allows him to activate and do more of that, then I'm going to be a very happy camper after all. And ultimately with Savard, I do think that David Savard steps up to the task. He's very capable of doing that, as exemplified by his consistent value on the trade market and what he's been able to do in the playoffs. There's a reason Tampa Bay wanted this guy so badly before they won their second straight Stanley Cup in 2021. I mean, you could also say that for David Savard, the first-round pick thing, who knows if it's all too guaranteed. If it is a team like Edmonton that goes out there and acquires Savard, I'm not really too sure the value on that first-round pick to begin with, because, look, if the Oilers are going to be as good as everybody says they're going to be, they could make the finals again. And if you're getting a 30th, 31st, 32nd overall pick maybe even, obviously it's not going to be too valuable. Oh, wait a minute. No, the Oilers don't have their first-round pick. Yeah, no, they already traded it away. Yeah, no, never mind. They would have to trade away the pick next year, or something like that. I mean, hey, Ben Sherratt got a first, so there certainly is potential here for David Savard to get some as well, especially since he's so much cheaper than what anybody else could be if you wanted to double retain with some other team there. I mean, you'd be getting a pretty good steal, I'd say. David Savard at 1.7 divided by 2, that is $900,000-ish, sorta. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you're an Edmonton Oilers or a Montreal Canadiens fan, how do you feel about the idea of David Savard getting sent over to Edmonton? This is the umpteenth time we've talked about this particular idea, but it's so easy that we might have to go out there and talk about it once more. The last time the Canadiens sent a prime defenseman over to Edmonton, it worked out pretty well, I would say, since Brett Kulak became a staple of that blue line, and the draft pick that the Canadiens got in that trade ended up becoming Lane Hutson. So, yeah, take with that what you will. Thoughts in the comment section below if you're a Canadiens or an Oilers fan. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.